Okay, my fellow English teacher friends. So, what we're going to do for this workshop is take a look at one of my kids' favorite books, If You Give a Mouse a Cookie, and examine how this book can actually help you teach line of reasoning in a manner in which your students actually get it. So, we're going to take a look at deductive and inductive reasoning principles through an Aristotelian lens, and then we'll re explore, if you're familiar with my videos, how my students write their body paragraphs syllogistically. So, we'll take a look at a synthesis essay that my students are working on presently, and then a fun activity that actually can get your students to create a line of reasoning similar to the book If You Give a Mouse a Cookie. So let me dive right into this. And one of the things that I say often to teachers that I work with when I'm doing PD or pushing into districts or working with departments is this: good writing equals good thinking. And I find that most of the students that I work with have great ideas swarming around in their heads. Like they can come up with the abstractions, they can come up with the thinking necessary to crank a good essay. But that transference from head to paper is very difficult. And I'm a big contender. I'm a big believer in the fact that if you equip students with a workable and manageable, accessible template, or call it a heuristic, that they should be able to produce some good writing that's very cogent, clear thinking, and logically rather bulletproof. So I've talked about the syllogistic method quite a bit in my other videos, but I'll just recap it, especially if you're new to my video series. And it comes from the Aristotelian tradition. Aristotle ran a school called the Lyceum, and the rich aristocratic boys would go there to learn things like oration, polemics, and then the math and the science, basically, the art of debate. And the boys would sit around in groups, and they would wrangle with these big philosophical questions. And maybe you're familiar with the text Plato's Republic, where the essential question of what is justice is thrown out, and all these great philosophical thinkers of the era step to the mic, and they offer a syllogistic explanation of what is justice. And then the men gather around and they deconstruct that definition, and they say invariably, nah, something's lacking there, something's askew. So the next philosophical think tank would come to the mic and offer his perspective, and basically the text negate syllogism after syllogism. And all a syllogism is when you argue from premise to conclusion. Principally for the purposes of writing, we'll see that it's deductive versus inductive. So I might say something in a first premise like arsenic is deadly. And then second premise, my dog ate arsenic. You're naturally going to conclude the fact that your dog is most likely going to die if it eats arsenic, because arsenic is deadly. And that's the type of thinking that we want our students to maintain in their lines of reasoning when they are arguing. Sometimes when our students write, they'll say something like, arsenic is deadly. The Beatles wrote about strawberry fields. My dog is going to die. It's like ultimately, if they go astray, it's because that second premise is not connected to the first premise. Or what we see often is that students don't even have a first premise in their writing. And that's why we read papers that are so plot heavy. They break from the demands of the assignment and they write plot analysis versus literary analysis. Or in synthesis writing, they just regurgitate the articles instead of having an argument that is central, which they need to fulfill the requirements of the assignment. So here's another example of a basic syllogism. So if I make the claim in the first premise, any 38-year-old or older non-felon born in the U.S. can run for the presidency, it's a truth statement, right? Stated as the truth. That's empirical. Second premise, I could assert James is 42, born in the state of Rhode Island, has no criminal record. So again, you just cogently, logically can deduce that James can run for the presidency. And that's the essence of a basic syllogism. And I know that's a quick synopsis of it. There's a whole, history and, mechanics to the syllogistic method. But for the purposes of this video, I'm just going to give it a cursory glance. So here are some deductive syllogisms, and this is how I get my students to set up their arguments when they write. So I contend that the syllogistic method can be used across the expository modes. So for rhetorical analysis, literary analysis, synthesis, argument, persuasion, and it even works for research. So students can use one template, one solitary template, to construct all of their body paragraphs across the expository modes. The only thing that shifts is the focus of the first premise. So in rhetorical analysis, obviously you're going to be talking about rhetorical terms and devices. And for literary analysis, you would focus on literary terms and devices. Argument, persuasion, and synthesis, you focus on the why reasons of the thesis. And I guess that's also true for research. And as I said, we'll take a look at synthesis, and I have a ton of other videos for literary analysis if you want to take a look at those. So in a first premise, I might say, it is unsafe to play in the rain. Now, if I'm going to keep a line of reasoning, I have to talk about something with regards to playing in rain if I'm going to keep that line of reasoning. If I start talking about pepperoni pizza, or the game of Jeopardy, then I'm probably going to have a logical fallacy. It's going to break, and we're going to scratch our head and say, where did that logic fell apart? And that happens a lot in writing. So second premise, I say, it is raining today. So what we'll have in deductive reasoning is these so's and therefores, if, then, thens, kind of statements like that. So it would be dangerous to play now. Or if I say all fruits have vitamins, all apples are fruits, see the therefore statement, therefore all apples have vitamins. All amphibians are cold-blooded. All frogs are amphibians. Therefore, all frogs are cold-blooded. So each piece, the first premise has to link with the second premise, and then the conclusion kind of comes full circle upon the argument. And here's one last one that we'll look at. All pets are loyal. All dogs are pets. Therefore, all dogs are loyal. So what I have my students do is actually create some deductive syllogisms. I usually have them create 5, and then we go over them as a class, just as a preparation to write syllogistic body paragraphs. They have to know the basics of a syllogism. But one thing that I have them do, which is actually a lot of fun, is to have them write their own stories based on the syllogistic structure of If You Give a Mouse a Cookie. Because if you break down that book, it's kind of like Plato's Republic in many ways, but it's a children's story. So you're given, an essential question, similar to what is justice? What happens if you give a mouse a cookie? And the author of the book, Laura Numeroff, creates a bunch of syllogisms that ultimately answer that essential question. And if you think about synthesis in particular, you're starting with an essential question, and that's often the case with argument and persuasion. And all expository writing is the art of argument. An argument is question based, so it actually works to set students up to tackle all of the expository modes. So what I have my students do as an activity is to write their own If You Give a Mouse a Cookie. Just change the topic and change the scenario, but keep it syllogistic. So I wrote a book for my students as a model, because I'm always talking about Bob Ross, your instruction, right? So if you give a writing assignment, do it and use your samples as a model for the kids. So what I do is I show them my book, and it's entitled "If You Give a Flat Tire a Mechanic," right? So here it is. If your tire runs over a nail, he's going to ask you to see the mechanic, right? Note the syllogisms here. When you take him to the mechanic, he'll probably want to play with the monkey wrench. When he's finished, he'll want to wash the motor grease off his hands. Then he'll want to play with the bubbles in the sink and blow them into the thin air. So it has this logical progression. If this, then this. If this, then that. So's and therefores, right? Connect the line of reasoning. When he sees the suds all over the place, he might have the urge to mop the floor. So he'll probably ask for a mop and a bucket. When he's finished cleaning the floor, he'll want to dry it so that no one slips and hurts themselves. So he'll ask for a rag or two. He might get carried away and start cleaning the entire shop. He may even end up washing all the screwdrivers and rubber mallets. When he's done, he'll probably be thirsty and tired. You'll need to pour him a tall glass of water and prepare a corner of the garage for him to take a nap. So you can see this is following a similar progression, a similar line of reasoning to If You Give a Mouse a Cookie, just changing the dynamic. And the kids can write their own stories, which they're pretty creative when you cut them loose. And in effect, they're learning how to keep a line of reasoning in a very, guardrail training wheel scaffolded kind of way before you switch it over to expository writing. He'll slug the water and then fluff his pillow and pull the covers up over his head. He'll probably want to read from his favorite car magazine, which is Popular Mechanics, and then he'll want to cut out pictures of his favorite cars. He'll ask for a pair of scissors. He'll get so excited that he'll jab himself in the belly with the scissors. He'll ask to see the mechanic. Yet again, he'll have a flat. So you can see here, in all syllogisms, you basically end where you begin. And I'm going to demonstrate this for you in a second with a couple of samples that my students wrote for a synthesis essay centered around SpongeBob SquarePants. It's kind of keep it training wheel, keep it basic at first, right? So we're scaffolding the how to stay within the parameters of the template. So I ran this assignment a number of times. So when I've pushed into districts and worked with departments, we've run this essay as early as 9th grade honors. We've done it with 10th graders, 11th graders, and even we've upped the ante a little bit and ran it with AP Lang students. I have done it personally with my AP language students, and it seems to work for all levels. You just have to figure out, what your students are capable of and what they need and meet them at that place. So you can simplify it as needed or crank the complexity if your students are really, good writers and eager beavers and can do more with an essential question like this. So what I would like to do is take a look at 2 syllogistic body paragraphs that my students wrote, where the line of reasoning is pretty clear, deliberate and cogent, and then just talk my way through and explain to you how that line of reasoning gets created. So here's the basis of this assignment. The students have an essential question. Does SpongeBob SquarePants have any educational merit for its intended age demographic? And the age demographic is 5 through 12. So students had an interesting homework assignment, and we actually did, for some of my classes that aren't good with doing homework, we actually did it in class. So I said, to have some source material, I want you to watch any 2 SpongeBob episodes that you want. And you'll be surprised of how many students know this show inside and out. And they had perfect episodes in which to answer this essential question. So I just arbitrarily chose 2 to show in class. And we ended up having a Socratic seminar about what we saw, visually in terms of, the rhetoric and the representations and everything that pertains to this question. And it was a great Socratic seminar. Kids got really invested in it. And then from there, we wrote our introductions, and I do have a video in my YouTube channel that goes over this whole essay, including the introductions. So what we did was just answer the essential question either through the declarative or the inverted template for the thesis statement, and then from there I had them get their sources. So to support, defend, qualify their thesis statement. I had a few articles for them, one that said yes to the question, one that said no to the question, and one that kind of shrugged its shoulders and said, it depends, kind of, sort of, so that they had some various takes on it. And then they needed to find other sources to help them argue their point. So from there, we did the body paragraphs. So this is what the syllogistic method looks like when you're doing synthesis writing. The first premise is going to be an argument stating a why reason. And let me explain what I mean by that. Up top in the introduction, the only thing the student's doing is answering the essential question. Yes, no, or maybe it depends. So if the student is saying yes to the essential question, why are you saying yes in the first premise? Or why are you saying no? Or why are you saying it depends? Why are you qualifying? And as you'll see with my students, the first premise is always going to take 3 sentences. The College Board in particular, and I use this rule even with 9th graders, even if I was teaching synthesis with like 7th or 8th graders, I would say your argument must be central. I think the College Board is very wise in saying that, because students put their second premise way too high up in the body paragraph, so much so that it might come in the first or second sentence, and therefore they lose the centrality of their argument. So I like 3 sentences to get that argument established, and you'll see my students do that. The second premise is going to be the textual support, and this is where they're juggling their source material. And I like to see a teeter-totter balance between the quoting and the paraphrasing for that. And then for this particular paper, I wanted my students to use or to draw from the source material 3 separate times. So they could use one source twice, but since they're synthesizing, I said that's kind of a plural word, so you need to have at least 2 different sources in here. And the samples I'll show you, each of the sample paragraphs have 3 sources in the syllogistic body paragraph. And then the conclusion of the syllogistic body paragraph is going to be the textual analysis. And this is the link and the echo. So I always tell my students the first premise is a promise. You have to go back to it, just like the deductive reasoning syllogisms that we saw. So students ask me this: introductory paragraphs, while the template is strictly scaffolded, introductions are 4 sentences long, no more, no less, always 4 sentences long. So the bright students say, hey, Mr. Kuhn, since we're working with templates, how long should a syllogistic body paragraph be? And I tell them, if you want to have enough support and analysis and really hammer your argument and have a cogent line of reasoning, I think you should shoot for 10 sentences. Like that's kind of the magic mark. So if you're like 9, 10, 11, somewhere around there, that's perfect. But I put a hard cap at 12, because especially when kids have episodes that they can use as a primary source, man, oh man, oh man, do they like to just open the floodgates and tell you every little nitty-gritty minutia detail of that episode, and they have these big girthy run-on body paragraphs. So hard cap at 12. And the last thing I'll say before we look at the samples is, when I say conclusion, I'm talking the conclusion of the syllogistic body paragraph. So body paragraphs have conclusions. I'm not talking about the conclusion paragraph of the essay. So let's take a look at the first 3 sentences. There is a major training wheel in here. And Since it was the first synthesis essay of the year for my students, I encouraged my, students that consider themselves to be struggling or emerging writers to use this guardrail. I said to them, if you state 2 words, reason why, if you say reason why, you will have a why reason. And you could get anchored in your argument and delineate your reasons. So in both of these examples, you're going to see students say reason why. You'll also see that my students did these papers in the middle of September. I got my students September 7th this year. We started after Labor Day. So in terms of the basics and the fundamentals, they're still struggling a little bit, but the line of reasoning is going to be very deliberate and clear. So look at the first 3 sentences here and see if the student has a clear why reason. There are several reasons as to why parents should pull the plug on SpongeBob. So they're laying the foundation, and then they're just going to enumerate. First, given the intended age demographics, the show offers 0 pedagogical value unless you're looking to instill the qualities of being rude and annoying. Study after study makes clear one simple fact: young children learn nothing constructive from this program. So previously, I talked about the first premise serving as a promise. They promised us something here in terms of establishing the line of reasoning. The third sentence says study after study. So if we're going to have a line of reasoning, they have to talk about studies. They're also talking about the lack of pedagogical value in terms of behaviors that kids can learn from SpongeBob. So I'm expecting to see something about behaviors, and I'm expecting to see something about studies. In the 4th sentence, you begin the second premise, and I tell my students, immediately get into your sources, right? So you can start with an episode or one of the written sources that you've used and annotated. So this student does it correctly. They say, in a recent study conducted by Johns Hopkins University and Mark Wilcox, they reported that the only takeaways from watching SpongeBob is the assurance that your child will become overstimulated, agitated, and negatively reinforced after watching the show for an hour. So we are connected. The line of reasoning is intact still, right? We're walking a straight line down that umbrella concept of the first premise. The other thing you'll notice that my students are learning in this paper is how to embed quotes and have good quote transitions. So I have a simple way to do that. I tell them if they place a minimum of 5 words, so not exactly, but a minimum of 5 words in front of a quote, and if they don't quote dump, meaning they keep the quote relatively small, then it should sound conversational, and this student did it very well. They have some words before the quote and some words after the quote, but sometimes you can finish the sentence at the end quote, so it doesn't matter. They've detailed the source. We know where it's coming from. So I was satisfied with that for an early paper. I didn't get into all the mechanics of MLA. I'll save that for later. So we quoted, and we don't want to belabor Wilcox. We don't want to go on and on and on about Wilcox. So let's wrap him up and then bring something else in. Participants in the case study saw their heart rates accelerate and their eye movements shift at an alarming rate. So again, we only have about 10 sentences to do this, so let's move on. We have other sources to incorporate, and now we're going to transition to Pam Shriver. But here's the thing. We can't abandon Wilcox, right? If we're going to have a line of reasoning, Shriver needs to talk to Wilcox. Shriver needs to hold the hand of Wilcox and build upon that idea. It needs to stay connected. So look at how this arrangement is made. Pam Shriver indicated, based on her own studies, that this is a surefire way to elicit ADHD in your child while erasing all of your positive child rearing. So go back to the first premise. We're still talking about studies, and we're still talking about behaviors. So the line of reasoning is intact. all of the textual support needs to be germane to the first premise, to the promise of the first premise. So you're going to have to teach your kids how to quote with deliberation. And I use some basic graphic organizers for this that I only use in the beginning of the school year unless the kid is really struggling and needs that kind of scaffold. But ultimately, I want to move them away from that. But given that it was September, first paper, I had them organize their quotes and basically go quote diving in their sources to connect to the first premise. So everything's aligned here, but we're not done. We have two sources, so let's go on to the next slide to continue the syllogistic body paragraph. And now they're going to an episode. So connect the episode to Wilcox and Shriver. Have them all talking to each other. One episode that illustrates these points nicely is Season 2, Episode 10. Shriver notes that within a 5-minute span, there are 348 attentional blinks, 20 times the rate of ADHD values. But this is only half of it. In this episode, SpongeBob and his friends are fiending for cigarettes and actually scheme up ways to secure a pack. Let me ask you, and I know some of you might object to this direct rhetorical question and the use of you, but overlook it. We're talking line of reasoning. I was okay with it given the context of the year. Let me ask you, how is this age appropriate and what kind of pedagogy is this? It actually sounds like a lawyer. It's a pretty cool argument, even though it violates some rules that some English teachers have. Further, Patrick, because he harbors a resentment towards SpongeBob, finds himself inflicting a massive wedgie on his friend. So we're still talking about behaviors and we're still talking about studies. So this is perfect, right? Absolutely clear line of reason. So in the end, what we have to do is the conclusion. And this just takes a couple of sentences. Usually I tell my kids 2-3 sentences. That's all you need. So you're going to see the kid says I'm overlooking that because I'm just showing you how he established his line of reasoning. And we worked on his pronouns in the revision. But pretty cool how he echoes the thesis in this and shakes hands with the first premise. I don't know about you, but I do not know many parents who are encouraging this type of behavior in their households. The bottom line is that parents need to parent and ensure that they are not being duped by an irresponsible TV babysitter. SpongeBob is not age appropriate, no matter how you slice it. So when I'm grading essays, I always go back to the first premise and say, did you keep the promise? The first line of the first premise is, there are several reasons as to why parents should pull the plug on SpongeBob. Do you see how the kid ended where he began? That's perfect deductive reasoning. That's perfectly calculated, right? And we've covered the studies and we've covered the behavior very thoroughly in the second premise. And down in here, the kid echoed his thesis statement. So that's a very good cogent line of reasoning. It's perfectly intact, walks a straight line, and bulletproof from start to finish. So let me show you one more just to really hammer home the idea. So again, same template can be used. Every single time a student writes across the expository modes, the template can be used. So the first premise is an argument stating a why reason. Yet again, that's going to be 3 sentences long. Second premise is going to be the teeter-totter balance of textual support. Use the sources and the episodes. And again, this kid's going to use 3, an episode and 2 articles, just like the first. That was kind of the magic formula I wanted them to adhere to as we were practicing. And the conclusion is going to have the link and the echo, so the textual analysis. So we're going to shoot for 10 sentences, hard cap at 12. So 3 sentences, the kid is going to say reasons why to make sure that they have a why reason. Let me spell out the reasons why watching SpongeBob is in some cases good. First, teaching young kids about the habits of establishing a strong work ethic is unquestionably something we want all of our youth to know. Second, SpongeBob clearly illustrates for children how to effectively establish interpersonal relationships. So again, my students are using me and I was okay with that. That wasn't the point of my lesson. I was just teaching them line of reasoning. That was my sole focus. So we worked on that afterwards in our writing workshops. So he has a first reason and a second reason. If we state this as a promise, we should see things like interpersonal relationships in the second premise, and this student mentions work ethic. So we should see those two things, those two topics in the second premise. So immediately in the fourth sentence, which begins the second premise, we're going to do the same thing that the first example did. We're going to dive into our sources. This student chose to start with the episode. We see these ideas at play in the episode when the Krusty Krab is forced to shut its doors due to lack of sales because the seas have become overpolluted. SpongeBob does not rest on his laurels and say, ho hum, poor is me, but instead he immediately becomes resourceful and demonstrates his great work ethic. Perfect. Note this. The student in the first premise mentioned work ethic first before interpersonal relationships. So a line of reasoning needs a sequence, it needs a chronology. If you said work ethic first, then in the second premise, you probably want to start with work ethic and then get to the interpersonal relationships. So have a chronology. First, he appoints himself as Czar of the Sea and gathers his friends to undertake a massive cleanup operation. Second, he does this for free under humble disguises. And I told this kid, you're going on kind of a lot about the episode, and this is one of the snafus of the episodes as a source. Kids love to retell stories. As soon as they have a chance to get plot summative, it's like a cozy slipper that they put on and really run off with that plot. So in the revision, I told this kid, you got to cut this way back, and this is okay. It might be a little over the top, but it's okay. So we move on to a written source. Now, Hank Ellington here has to be talking to this episode. All right, so let's see if they are chit-chatting with each other. Hank Ellington, a Baptist minister for 30 years, attests that the program mirrors the teachings of fundamental Christianity, such as the traits of humility, grace, and compassion. Now we're talking about interpersonal relationships, right? And that's perfect. Every parent on the face of the earth wants to foster these attributes in their kids. Ellington went on to explain that kids do a lot of monkey see, monkey do, and he is right. Young children often mimic and mirror their environments. And through extension, we're still talking about work ethic. We're implying it, and that's okay. SpongeBob, therefore, is perfectly okay for kids to watch, especially if we want to teach them how to become better people and citizens. Now, they're going to go to another source. Vicky Dover concurs in that she sees a certain moral decay in our country over the past few decades. So Dover is talking to the previous sources, and that's one thing that's essential for a line of reasoning. Connect. She sees SpongeBob as being the type of program to address the secularism and selfish me-first mentality that has become so pervasive in our society. Further, Dover and others view the program to be a modern-day Mr. Rogers or even Sesame Street. So now we're at the conclusion, and we're just going to keep the promise of the first premise and echo the thesis statement and do it in 2 to 3 sentences. This kid's getting a little long, so definitely needs to wrap it up. As you can see, SpongeBob is teaching us the real pedagogy that all kids need, the concepts of decency, friendship, and the betterment of mankind. While he is certainly an unorthodox character, he is nonetheless the type of person parents aspire for their children to become. So you can see here, the first syllogistic body paragraph that we went through has a totally different perspective, totally different thesis than this one. One said yes, one said no to the essential question. but both exercise the same template in order to establish the line of reasoning. And these were really well written. So, we didn't even talk about the compositional nuance of sentence structure, vocab, voice, rhythm, flow. That was stuff that I was working on with my students right out of the gate in September, and these kids are doing okay with those lessons. So hopefully you found that to be useful and it can incorporate it into your classroom. So just to wrap this up, so there are a few ways that you can get more of this. So I will be uploading to my YouTube channel quite often now that Tim Freitas and I have announced that we're collaborating on a textbook together. I'm teaching a course that I'm going to gather a little bit of data from in terms of incorporating that into the textbook, and it is entitled the Teach It Right 5-Week Mastermind. So I'm going to meet with a small group of teachers over a 5-week period. We meet every Sunday night at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for an hour. I'm going to launch 3 of these before writing the book, and I still have 2 more sessions to go. So if you want to learn all the tricks of my trade, like my 40 alternative grading methods, my templates, my Plato's Plato discussions, that modality, then let's work together. So I really want to work with some ambitious teachers that are looking to change how they do things and get inventive. So I'll also be doing some free webinars with Perfection Learning. It looks like I'm on the docket to do 1 a month for the foreseeable future. So I'll be unpacking some of this further. And then I'm also working with the National Writing Project in the coming months as well. So there's plenty more if you want it. So if you want more information, you can write me at teachingwritingcoach@gmail.com, and I can pass along this PowerPoint presentation that I just used to record this video. I can give you the SpongeBob articles and that writing workshop PowerPoint if you want. Whatever you need, I'll pass on to you so that you can run this. And then I also have a website where you can learn more about that 5-week mastermind, which is teachinghowtowrite.com. So, all right, I went long on this one. So again, hopefully you can incorporate this into your classroom, and your students can learn how to write very cogently and very clearly and logically. So that's it for now. Happy teaching and happy writing.